Okay, so an official welcome to everybody. Great to have you back at what is now our third webinar in our Protecting Your Future program. I'm going to focus today on getting productive. So this kind of follows on from our initial conversations about the Survive, Adapt, Thrive concept as we sort of went into and start to come out now of the COVID-19 lockdown situation. The next three webinars are very much now, I think, thinking about once we're on the other side. So today, starting with the need to be more productive. Then next week, we've got Name joining us from Notepad, leading brand agency, to talk about the power of leveraging your brand into the future. And then we'll wrap up the week after with a short webinar on how to sustain growth for the longer term. So in terms of getting productive today, we're going to focus on three things. First of all, as a leader, the need for the use of technology and what that means for us. And then just finishing off with a conversation about how we remove waste. So we'll crack in. As always, I'll move this through relatively quickly, about half an hour, with an idea to keep plenty of time at the end for questions and discussion with anybody that's wants to take the floor or post something for me to answer. And feel free to post things as we go, which you can all share and talk to each other on, or I'll pick up again at the end. Okay, so I thought I'd start with you. I don't want to do a half an hour time management lesson, so I thought I'd just share a couple of things with you. The first thing, I think, it's fairly obvious to state we all have the same amount of time, 168 hours if you hadn't worked it out. I think the challenge is probably what we do with it. So I thought I'd do to start is to share a short video with you from these two guys you've probably heard of and seen before, around this notion of being busy as a leader.
I also remember Warren showing me his calendar, and
I love this.
I had every minute packed, and I thought that was the only way you could do things. And the fact that he is so careful about his time.
Can I show this to the audience?
He has days
that there's nothing on.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'm trying to show.
The best
And
well, this is October.
It's very high tech. Be careful. You might not understand.
I'm going to hold. I'm not going to show the thing. But this is the week of April, of which there are only 3 entries for a week.
Yeah, there'll be 4 maybe by April.
File tax.
So that taught you what? Not to crowd yourself too much and give yourself time to read and think and...
Right, that you control your time, and that sitting and thinking may be a much higher priority than a normal CEO who, there's all this demand and you feel like you need to go and see all these people. It's not a proxy of your seriousness that you filled every minute in your schedule.
And people are going to want your time.
Yeah,
and it's the only thing you can't buy. I mean, I can buy anything I want, basically, but I can't buy time.
And so to have time is the most precious thing you can have.
I better be careful with it. Yeah. There's no way I will be able to buy more time.
Okay, I think there's a number of lessons in there, which I'm happy to take a call on, take questions on later. But I think I love the heading up there, the busy is the new stupid, which is the kind of theme of the wider interview. If you want to look that up on YouTube or wherever else you can find it. But I think there's definitely there's a mental thing at the moment where I see not just leaders, but many people just feel they have to say they're busy. If they're not busy, it's like they're not useful. I think probably just the one thing I was going to add to that is I think some of the best leaders are at the point where they walk into work every day and they actually have nothing to do. And I think the power of having nothing to do, although it would never literally be that way, I know, but hypothetically is if that is the case, not only are you probably managing your team well, but you have time to think about what next and what do we do better, and be more strategic. But also, when people do need you, you're available. I think I see so many leaders that are so busy, they're not actually there for their main purpose, which is to be there for their people. So I thought I'd start with that. And the other thing I thought I'd share with you, like I said, rather than just doing time management stuff, I'll share with you our framework for time management, which might help you just rethink kind of how you are looking at your time. I think, as they always said, it's about actually what you do with your time and the things you spend time on. I think we all know that we're probably at a place where we're never going to get everything done that we think we'd like to get done. And this framework we put together was to try and navigate through this. So the first thing I think people need to be better at is clarity of inputs. So the middle box there, projects, is probably what people would call their to-do list. So it's a list of projects they're working on or tasks they have to get done today. And absolutely, you should have that in some form. But I think what people don't have clarity on is actually what are the things that what we call disciplines or business as usual. So things that you have to do every day, every week, every month, every quarter, every year, because the fact that they happen all the time, people tend to not give them attention. But I tend to see people doing those things at 8 o'clock at night because it's almost like there was a surprise they had to do that thing this Friday that they do every Friday. So I think just writing those down and the frequency with which you have to do them is a good start point as well. And the other box is kind of a blank piece of paper that I think people should have, which is, it's a noisy world now. And I think just starting to list the things that take your attention that you don't plan for is quite a powerful exercise, because you start to then recognize the patterns and the regularity of things that take your attention. And then you can start to think about, are they important, and do I actually need to practically make time for those things, or actually do I need to push them away? So I think a bit of work on the clarity of your inputs is good. The next thing we talk about is filters, and I think this is where time management comes in. So again, there are millions of ways that you can filter what you do, whether you use a Cody matrix, a must, should, could type approach, but some way of kind of prioritizing all the things that you potentially need to do. And if you do those things, we say you get to a point where you have theoretically a consolidated prioritized task list. Now, the trouble is most people do get to that point, but most people's time management is still poor and their productivity still isn't where it needs to be. And I think the big red flag is this one here. And I think Warren Buffett comes at it slightly differently to the way we'd maybe talk about it. But I often see people, I say to them, do you have your meetings in your diary? And of course they say yes. And I say, why? And they say, well, because, I need to know when to go and I need to know how long they're going to take. But the question I ask them is, but what about all the tasks you have to do? They have to be done by a certain time and they're going to take a certain amount of time, yet they're not in your schedule. It's almost like we put our meetings in and then we have this big list of stuff we have to do and we just hope it will fit. So what you see with super productive people is that everything they have to do, whether it's physical meetings or physical tasks, they are in some way scheduled. Now, I think Warren Buffett does it by not filling his diary with meetings. So he's got so much spare time that he knows that he can fit his bucket of stuff to do. But I think for most of us, because we are busy with meetings, I think actually putting into your schedule, when you're going to do these things will start to tell you if you have enough time, if you're working on the right things, or if you need to change something. I think the last part of the framework I just leave you to think about is, regardless of how well you manage your time, people will always try and hijack you. So you do need to think about what personal tactics you use and what mechanism you use to almost protect and defend your position, because people will gladly destroy your schedule and your productivity for their own. Okay, so the last thing I want to talk around about you in terms of being productive is this notion of capability versus capacity. So obviously the whole piece around the way you manage your time is around your capacity, getting the most of the capacity you have. But I think that the things that leaders miss very often is that there is an opportunity to increase your capacity by improving your capability. And what I mean by that is, by getting better at something or even learning something new that you couldn't do before, often increases your ability to do more of something or do something you couldn't do before to achieve your goals. So I think, ask yourself, am I building my capability continually, even though I may be very senior, because that does drive your productivity. Just kind of share with you a small thing we did probably 3 or 4 years ago now. We did some research on what great leaders look like. And this was a theme that in every instance came through. And what we saw with great leaders is that in every instance, visibly, when you looked at them, they were clearly very capable. And I deliberately don't use the word competent, because there's many competent people who know what to do but can't actually then go and do anything with it. And visible leaders are clearly capable and can apply what they do to tasks and to running businesses and people. But every case as well, the invisible factor in them was they were totally self-challenged. They were always questioning, as good as they were, could they have done it better? Could they have done it differently? Is there a different way to do it? So I think just to challenge yourself, are you self-challenged, and is that driving you to improve your capability, however good you might be now? I'm not going to dwell on this, but it's just, I think it's a reason why, we at the cornerstone of our leadership framework, we have continual learning to drive that, and again, when you read and study great leaders, they will always talk about this desire to continually learn and improve. Okay, so moving away from you and moving to technology, I think a couple of things to say on technology, if I just want to share just a different way of thinking about this. I think there's no doubt that technology is important now, particularly for productivity. There's much written about automation, much about how many jobs will be automated, how fast you believe that will happen, and to the extent you believe it will happen, I think is very debatable. I think I'm unconvinced by some of the numbers. I think we'd socially melt down if that became true, but undoubtedly there will be more automation. I think we'll be forced to do that through competitiveness as well. And probably a question for you is, if you need to gain competitive advantage, if you need to improve profits, if just the whole thing that's happened with COVID means you've just got to get slicker. Obviously, automation is one way to look at that. And I'll just share some work we did with Berkeley over in California, which is probably one of the leading universities globally for strategy. And they did a piece of research that was so unbelievable that, and I've shared this with one or two on the webinar I know before, but for those that I haven't, the piece of research they did was so unbelievable that many people replicated it only to find the same answer. And what they basically discovered and positioned was that between 1985, for those of you that remember what a workplace looked like then, where there was very little technology, we didn't really have mobile phones, we certainly didn't have smartphones, very, very few computers around the workplace, probably people were still smoking at their desks in many instances. And to accelerate that through to 2015, when they did this research, the change in the adoption of technology was huge, absolutely massive. I'm sure you can picture that in your mind now. But they also extrapolated that out into what that would look like from 2015 forward for another 30 years. And the outcome of that was that we've only actually seen 1% of the adoption of technology from between 1985 and 2015, and we still have 99% to come. Now, it doesn't mean we're going to invent loads of new stuff. I think what's happened is we've invented lots of stuff, but the adoption and use of it is fairly limited. But what we're going to see now is a massive acceleration of the use of this technology. So again, another reason to be thinking about technology. What I wanted to share with you, though, is just kind of how you approach adopting technology. So I think you need to think of systems or technology alongside processes and people. And I think this is where we get lost in this technology-driven world. Because ultimately what we're doing is we're getting our people to interact with other people, and often people are our clients, to sort of create some, what we call MOT, which is some kind of moment of truth, to make something happen. And ultimately, you know, when our people are engaging with other people, you know, whatever they do, we want them to do that more effectively. So what we do is we build a process. So we go, if we put a process in place, that will make sure they do what they do better and more consistently, so we get better outcomes with our customers, for example. And then what we think about is, okay, can we make that process more efficient? And that's where we bring in systems and technology. And I think what's happening now is that technology is such a huge thing that we're just starting with systems and technology, and then hoping it will improve something at the front end. And very often it doesn't. So, you know, when you see good technology and system building, and they always build what they call, you know, there's system architecture, site maps, there's different ways to describe it, but they actually build process first. So I would ask yourself, you know, what moment of truth are you trying to serve? What kind of outcomes or problems are you trying to solve there? What is the process? Can you draw it? Can you write it to achieve that? And then build a system to deliver that. Or if you're going to buy a system, ask yourself, is that system going to drive that process? Because if it isn't, you're possibly not going to get the gain you want. Okay, so that's just a kind of a bit of a different thought on technology. And then just going to move on to the last part of the session around removing waste. So the importance of waste is huge. I mean, if you just go to 101 of business improvement, and you can scrub out business improvement and put scale up of a business, the three core things that need to happen for businesses is, you know, they have to, first of all, be able to create the structure that will sustain the scale and the improvement they want as quickly as possible. Without that, or without moving to that quickly, it doesn't usually happen. And then behind that, very quickly, they need to drive out waste. And then ultimately, we need to ensure that our people are with us. That's a mindset and beliefs. And there is, you know, the theory says we need to start at the top down. And it also tells us that, you know, timeline wise, you know, structure, you can start to move probably within 6 months over the course of a couple of years. Waste, you can do something about probably in the first year, over 2 years. And mindset and beliefs, you know, is a long haul. Cultural transformation can take up to 5 years to embed. But I think the important thing on waste is, or two things, is one is that it isn't just something you do once, it's something you should be doing continually. And I'll talk about that a bit more in a second. And that most of it for us is invisible. So we can probably think about the stuff we obviously just throw away that we shouldn't in some way or form. But most waste is a kind of compound inefficiency, where we just do things in a way that it's long-winded, you know, the process doesn't make any sense. And so what most waste is kind of ways to sort of unlock utilization and productivity. And I'm going to explain that in a bit more detail in a second. So why this is important as well, you know, if you want to grow and you want to grow profitably, you only have 3 choices. You can put your prices up, which I think most people will say isn't possible. You can add more value, which does 2 things. It maybe attracts more profitable clients, or, you know, justifies putting your prices up, or you can drive efficiency. You know, when we're talking about efficiency, we're talking about waste, the way you buy, the specs you work to, the processes you work to, and obviously automation. But just focusing in on that waste piece, just by way of introduction, you obviously just can't keep putting more through an overloaded system. So you do need to ask yourself, is our operational environment or our system that we use overloaded now? Because you can't just keep chucking more into it. It will break at some point. Waste is a hugely effective way to increase profitability, because what we know is that most businesses on average run about 30% of their operating cost as waste. Now, probably the other thing to state there is that when you're looking at waste isn't a elimination exercise, it's a reduction exercise. So you will always carry some waste. You will maybe even choose to, depending on the type of business you're in. But it's a question of how do we just reduce that to try and recover some of that 30%. We've done hundreds of waste audits now in businesses, and I have to say, whenever we've done a waste audit, we've yet to do one where it's been less than 30%. So I think even that 30%, I think, could be challenged. We did one 2 years ago. We ran 10 waste audits within an engineering business at team level, and within 12 months, they actually recovered £600,000 to their bottom line, and they, as a business, only turned over 12 million. So it's really, really powerful. I think the challenge, though, for you is kind of to understand exactly what waste is, going back to the invisibility part, and actually where can it be found. So to help with that, I'm gonna share some stuff with you. This is all forms part of what I call a bigger waste reduction audit process, which is, we start with an audit. We need to prioritize the things we're going to try and tackle, because you will discover quite quickly there'll be endless things that you can do to reduce waste. You're probably going to need a team to drive it out if it's worth doing. And obviously you want to be measuring to make sure you get an effect. And as I said before, waste is a bit like barnacles on a boat. They tend to grow back. So you do need to repeat this process maybe every 6 to 12 months to make sure you pick up the new waste as they occur. So just focusing on that audit, I just want to share with you where this came from. This started with Takeshi Ono from Toyota, the kind of the father of lean and continuous improvement. But what we need to understand is this may have come out of manufacturing, but it's very much now in every industry. I've even seen big banks like Lloyd's here in the UK use this through their office environment to drive productivity and efficiency. So don't think this is a manufacturing tool. This is a tool for any business, including service industries. So what he did with this is he kind of came up with what we call the 7 Ws, or the 7 wastes, which is a way to start to think about where is our waste. So I'll quickly explain these to you and then just give you a tool that you can use back in your business. So the concept is that the first place to find waste is in overproduction or overservicing. So in its original form, overproduction would have been Toyota would have made, they would have sold 3 cars, but they'll make 4 because they knew one would be rubbish and they need to throw it in the bin. So obviously that extra car was waste. So that would be overproduction. But the overproduction directly translate into overservicing. So if you're in a service business, ultimately you are allowing for a certain amount of service for the fee you're charging. And anything you deliver over and above that is overservicing and will be eroding your profit. So overservicing for professional services businesses particularly is a huge issue. And I'll probably just mention here, because I know it's overservicing is a word I hear used a lot in terms of customer service, that we want to overservice our clients. And I think it's a very dangerous language, because if you take that literally, you are just throwing away your profit. I think you need to ask yourself a different question, which is what level of service do we allow for in the services we provide? Is it very high service? Is it average service? Is it just fairly basic service? Because that's the expectation you've given your client, and deliver to that. So if you want to overservice, what you're really saying is that we are a high service company. And so make sure you're charging for it, but don't overservice. Waiting is essentially from the moment we take an order to the moment we get physically paid, have the cash in our bank. At any point that there's things are waiting for something to happen is potentially wasted time. So that's a bit of an exercise of looking at the chain through your business from order to payment. Transportation, as it kind of states, is kind of the movement of stuff. So often logistics. So that's where you would see things that have happened in recent years, like logistics companies used to go and deliver truckloads of stuff and then realize that everything was coming back empty, and they've now reconfigured their network so that they tend to be full in both directions. So that would be an example where transportation waste has been tackled. Inappropriate processing, I think another huge one, particularly in professional services firms, but in most businesses of any scale, where the original definition of that was the right tool for the job. But in modern terms, it's I said the right person for the job. So as a leader, I'd basically say if you listed every individual task that you did and wrote that down on a piece of paper, and for any of those individual tasks that you do that we could pay somebody cheaper than you to do, essentially that's inappropriate processing and waste. Inventory is stock. So obviously stock is tied up cash and has a huge amount of waste attached to it, particularly if it ever never moves. Motions can be similar to transportation, but it's more about actual physical movement of people very often. So you'll see, particularly in big office environments, they'll actually do time and motion studies on the way people are working and positioned and travel around an office environment. So there's famous studies like, where they started to put water and coffee machines by the photocopier because people wanted to check when the photocopier machine ran the coffee machine. So they thought if they put the copier there as well, they do some work while they're at it, and that proved to actually drive some more productivity through an office environment. But depends on your business whether motion's a big issue. And I think then probably the third big one for me with over servicing and inappropriate processing is defects, which is just mistakes. So the logic there is if you ever make a mistake, you have to put it right. And obviously then that adds cost. And if you make a mistake more than once, 3 or 4 times, obviously you're just quadrupling the amount of cost involved in doing that task or delivering that product. So defects always a huge area for waste. And probably the challenge there is, when people talk about the cost of quality, maybe offset that against the cost of having to keep doing things over and over again. So that's the waste audit. In terms of their descriptions, how it works. I've given you a handout for this because this is an exercise you need to do with your teams. My advice on this, going back to the example I gave you earlier, is get people as close to the front line as possible. When we did the exercise in the engineering firm, there were no managers or directors involved in those project teams. So £600,000 of bottom line saving without any leadership or management involvement, because these people knew what was going on at the sharp end of their business. But the exercise that you basically need to do is just brainstorm as many areas under these 7 headings as you can where you think you have potential waste. Remember, not about elimination. So you will put things in there that you'll never be able to eliminate, but there may be things that you think, actually, we spend a lot of time or money on these things and they could be massively reduced given time and effort. The next column where you see the numbers is where you do an exercise, and if you're an accountant, you won't like this exercise. It's about being approximately right rather than exactly wrong, where you try and estimate either the overall cost of that to us as a business over a month or a year, or you can work in time. So you work out the hours that you spend on that. And then the final column is just starting to ask yourself, how easy would this be to remove if we tackle it? So the idea being, you look at where the big numbers are and you look at the things that are potentially easiest and go after those first with your project teams. Just on that time, the time one's useful because I think sometimes when you do a waste reduction exercise, people can get fearful this is an exercise in cutting costs and ultimately cutting jobs. So it's tricky to position that. When you position it as a time reduction exercise, people feel safer with that, and you can talk about it as an exercise in helping them free up their time to do more productive things. So you might just find the language around time more useful than cash, depending on your business again and what you're doing. Okay, so I think just to finish on waste, it's part of a much bigger conversation. As I'm alluding to there, it's not a one-off action. It kind of fits into this lean process of continuous improvement, this thinking that we've got to continually looking to improve things, and it's all about small incremental gains. The theory around this is just go and do some stuff. So the reason the East is better than the West at continuous improvement is because they don't feel the need to be able to see the ultimate outcome or to be able to solve the whole problem. They just know that they need to improve something. They go on the journey. They plan to do something differently. They go in to try it and do it. They see if it worked, and if it worked, they lock it in with a standard, so we don't roll back to old standards. And if it doesn't, they go, what did we learn? And we try something again differently. So what we're just saying to maybe just start to think about this kind of concept of thinking in a continuous improvement mindset rather than in a very Western mindset, which is I have to sit down and work out the whole problem before I move forward and try and improve things. And I think more recently, it's interesting, there's been a direct correlation that I've seen between continuous improvement and actually the way that psychology works. So psychology more and more now, so a lot of therapists now working more and more on this brief psychology concept. So rather than trying to solve huge issues with people, they're just really breaking it down and just working with people to say, just work out what's working for that person and just get them doing more of that stuff. And the stuff that isn't working, just get them to stop doing it. And then just repeating that very simple process. And that process absolutely aligns with the process of continuous improvement. So there could be something psychologically that works for human beings when we take that continuous improvement mindset. Okay, and just to finish, there has in the last few years been an 8th waste added that I just wanted to make you aware of. I think there's a thinking now that for many businesses, they've done productivity to death. But the 8th waste that Toyota talk about now is this eighth waste of unrealized potential or unutilized talent. So the notion that actually all our people, and I'll just share a quote with you by Liz Wiseman, who used to run the Oracle Leadership University over in the US, that I think when I show to people, very few people disagree with that. So the question is, if we do agree with that, why aren't we releasing that potential, that talent in our people? Because that is a huge source of initial productivity. Could we release it? I just thought, if you haven't seen this book that Liz wrote, which it isn't the book on the eighth waste, but it very much plays into this concept of the eighth waste, where they've identified what, where as leaders, most leaders, and I probably include myself here, the way we've been taught to lead and manage actually diminishes people's ability to release potential. But there are a few people that multiply that. And I think this is for me one of the greatest leadership books I've read in the last few years. So I thought I'd share that with you as something you can read and sort of dip into this kind of notion of the eighth waste. Okay, so I think I just about nailed that in the 30 minutes. So just kind of summarizing today, be well managed, but as importantly, work on your capability to build more capacity. Absolutely leverage technology for efficiency, but as I say, I think there's a huge trap there. I see many people using technology that isn't giving them any advantage. Even in our business, we had a cull on apps. I think we culled 30% of the apps that we'd adopted in the last 10 years because we realized that a number of them were just basically adding layers into our processes. So, start with what's that end moment of truth you're trying to work on, what's the process you're trying to make more efficient, and then go from technology from that part. And then look at those 7 ways. So use those 7 ways to identify where you might have waste, but it's really about driving on that plan, do, check, act mentality. So just tackling one thing at a time, and accepting you might not get it right, but what do we learn from doing that, and then what can we take from that then to go again and hopefully get some kind of improvement. And then just finally start to utilize that 8th waste, build that capability in your people to gain more productivity. Okay, so as I said, it'd be great to take some questions. I'll jump out of this in a second. Just before I do that, for those that jumped on the courses that we're able to offer, keep on with those. You've got until October to complete them, and I know a number of you have got your teams on them. So again, your teams have got plenty of time. These materials will go out afterwards, as always. There'll be a recording and slides, etc., to reflect on those. And then for those who I'm not your coach, but likewise, I'm here for you with any questions that you might have. Okay, so I'm just going to jump out of the slide deck. So I suppose, as we normally do, it'd be great to, if you got any questions, just to stick your hand up and I'll give you the floor. If you're shy and you want me to do all the talking, pop it in the Q&A and I'll take it from there. I can see I've already got a question here, which I'll take first. But in the meantime, if you want to stick their hand up or add in extra questions, that would be great, either in the chat or the Q&A section. Okay, so Gordon, isn't there a thin line between over-servicing, over-delivering, being called waste to provide customer loyalty through go over the initial expectations? Yeah, okay. Yeah, so I think what you're saying there, Gordon, is that thin line between actually, delighting the customer and particularly in the early stages, obviously really impressing them, I think is kind of what you're saying there. And I think the answer is yes, there is a thin line. There's a couple of things I'd say though. I still would say go back to, if you ask people, do they want you to exceed their expectations, they would always say yes. But in truth, what they really want is they've done business with you and there's an expectation of what they're going to get for the transaction, and including that is the level of service that will come with it. So really it's about meeting that expectation of service you've set up in your customer's mind. If you do that, then you're where you need to be. I think the problem is that people do that. Sometimes they haven't allowed that level of service in their pricing. So that's one thing to look at there. So I still would take you back to, what is the level of service that we offer as part of what we do? And we're going to talk about value in a couple of weeks, which will come into this as well. But there's always, obviously, using common sense, a time to, just go, what, we're gonna do a bit more than we're supposed to here. And it can be for different reasons. I think what people miss there though is the opportunity to almost call that favor in. So if you're going to go over and above, it's almost finding a way to say to the customer, look, this is this is more than we should be doing for you, but, you know, make it aware that you're doing them a favor almost. You wouldn't want to put it that way, because at the very least you want emotional credit. So, you know, you want to be able to you want to at least them to recognize consciously that you are going over and beyond, and not to take it for granted, because the trouble is you set an expectation then for a level of service that maybe isn't what you're geared up or you're charging to deliver. So there's a couple of things there to think about, Gordon, I think, around that. If any of that didn't make any sense, feel free to jump in with another question or stick your hand up and I'll clarify that. Ralph's just asking what MOT meant. Oh, that was Ralph, that was a moment of truth. So I was just kind of explaining that for most businesses, there's a need for people to interact for whatever reason, which we just call moments of truth. And I think it's about making sure that whatever your systems are, that they're driving effective processes more efficiently to do that, not just technology for technology's sake. So that was the answer to that question. Okay, so I've got another question here. So I'm not just asking how to define the level of service a client should expect. If they have a question it takes research to answer, is that a waste of good customer service? If they ask why, I have to answer yes. Okay. I think if the question they're asking you is something, everyone's got a different, and I know Ralph's in a very technical business. If in your business, Ralph, but for any business, if it's a question that you should be expected to know the answer to because of the nature of what you do for your client, then you know you need to do it clearly. If it takes research for you to answer that question, there's probably two things to ask. There is, have we got a lack of knowledge in our business for what we are doing for our clients, or is it just that that's going to happen from time to time, and again within the resource of our customer service function, whatever that looks like, that we have the ability to better do that kind of stuff. But again, that then comes back to kind of what kind of resource and headcount you carrying for service, and is it allowed for in your pricing? We've got a question here from Pete on time management. Developing better time management is building better habits. Peter's just saying here, trying to build new habits are easy to start but hard to maintain. Do you have advice on maintaining a new habit to make it stick? Yeah, I mean, Peter, I've got some stuff. I'm just putting some stuff together at the minute on some practical ways to actually to habit build, because you're absolutely right. There's lots of research around how many times you have to do something for it to become, you know, just a normal behavior, either in terms of repetitiveness or in time. But I think the key thing is that while it's not yet a habit, it's about, you have to keep it conscious. So you have to find, ultimately you've got to find tactics for you that keep it front of mind. So whether that's, you know, it's on your to-do list every day, whether it's flashing up as a reminder in your calendar, you've got to do something very tangible and noticeable, almost as a reminder to do it. So it's about reminding yourself in a way that works for you. If you just kind of say to yourself, I'm going to do it a couple of times, and don't have something to stimulate you, then you are going to fall off and forget. So you've got to do something very physical for a period of time until what you'll notice is after a while is you'll start ignoring the reminder, whatever that reminder is for you, and then you know it's just embedded. Andrew's just going to ask the question on Gordon's question, which I think, just a reminder myself, was around this kind of thin line of over-delivering, over-servicing. How do you retrain expectations for existing clients who are accustomed to begin over-servicing? Yeah, it's a great question, Andrew. The honest answer is it's really hard. I don't think there's a short answer or short solution to it. I think you've just got to, there's probably a number of tactics I'd probably use with that. I think one is I would look at what we do for that client and say, could we do anything that we do for them more efficiently internally, so that there's no impact at the customer end, but we've taken some cost out at our end, so they're now getting the same thing, but actually it's not costing us as much to do, so we've kind of opened up that profit gap effectively. or brought the profit back. That's one tactic. I think another tactic is starting to think about if the relationship's going to be ongoing, how you can position future work slightly differently from what I know. With Andy's team yesterday, we had a big conversation about value and start to position it in a more value-adding way, as opposed to just the product and service you deliver. Because then you can start to move to maybe a negotiation around maybe different pricing potentially. You know, or there is sometimes, it depends. I think that probably the third thing I'd add to that, Andy, I'm thinking as I'm reading your question, is it depends sometimes about how much it's hurting you. If it's really hurting you, then probably the grown-up thing to do is to sit down with the client and actually have a frank conversation with them and actually say, look, the way we're working with you at the moment, it's killing us, and we're not making any money. I mean, if it's hurting you that badly, and I have done that with clients, and I've had clients that have done that with some customers they've had, and it doesn't always go exactly how you plan. It very rarely goes badly if it's planned correctly, and you may not get exactly what you want, but even if you make a small gain, then it's a start. So but I think that's a tactic I would say that I would move on if your over servicing is really hurting the profitability of what you do for them, to the point where you're starting to question whether it's even worth having the business. I think Ralph just saying we have too many generalities in our scope of services in our proposals. We need to be more exacting in what we are saying we will do. Yeah, and Ralph, that's a great one. We do some work on scope creep in project management, and one of the big problems with scope creep is the proposal starts the problem. So good businesses that control scope creep they do really good scoping before they propose. So their proposal is very explicit about what is and what is and isn't in scope. So immediately then, if you think that through when you're working with a client, you can immediately refer back to that and say, look, you can see that wasn't in scope. So are you saying you want us to add that to the scope? And obviously now we need to charge you, or if you don't want to pay anymore, then you understand that we can't do it for you. So yeah, the way you scope pre-proposal and the way you ensure your proposal is very clear about what is in scope is really, really critical. So that's a great point, Ralph. Thank you for sharing that. Good questions. I'm just seeing if there's any. Just make sure I've not missed anything in the chat. Yeah, there was a good point in the chat that I didn't pick up from earlier, that Gordon mentioned about that productivity swings quite considerably. I think that's normal. I think let's be honest, your productivity and your time management is never going to be perfect every day, but Gordon, I would definitely, and if you want me to talk about it in more detail offline, getting into scheduling what you need to do will help to improve that. I use the analogy with scheduling with people that it's kind of like if you run a factory, you have a whole list of work that clients want you to make for them, and you've got timelines when they want it by, and so you build a production plan effectively of what you're going to do on what machine at what time, which is essentially like a calendar. Let's be honest. And people say, yeah, but I can't do that on my own calendar because things change, things happen, things take longer than I expected, or somebody phones me and hijacks an hour. And I go, yeah. And if you're in a factory, a customer phones up and says, can you bring my order forward? Or a machine breaks down and comes to a grinding halt, and all sorts of things happen in a factory, but they don't, because of that, say, well, we're not going to plan. What they do is they do the plan, and then they do what I call shuffle. As things happen, they shuffle accordingly. So that's kind of the mindset you need to get into in your scheduling of your time. If you want to reduce that swing, is that you plan your time. There's a school of thought that says you should have no white space in your diary at all. Everything should be allocated. It doesn't mean you're always doing something. Going back to the Warren Buffett conversation, and the people of that school of thought say, when they just want to, sit on their couch, watch telly, and scratch their head, it's in their calendar. That's extreme, but it does kind of labour the point that all time is accounted for, and then when things happen or change, then they just shuffle it accordingly. It's easier to shuffle your schedule than it is to rebuild it every day, which is what we tend to do, which is why I think we have such huge swings. Okay, I think I've exhausted the questions. I'll just leave it open another couple of minutes in case people are still reflecting or want to come back on any of those points. Again, if anybody wants to chuck their hand up, feel free, and I'll give you the floor. got a question here on the 8th waste that Vanessa's just dropped in. How would you look towards developing? So Vanessa's just put a question here about the 8th waste and the unrealized potential, and asking me how would you look towards developing that talent in general terms? Would you recognize that with your team members, then look at personal development plans, involvement in projects, etc.? Can be more challenging in an SME, but obviously rewarding too. Yeah, I don't agree it's more challenging in an SME. I think there's a number of things in there, Vanessa, about releasing potential. I think there's a mindset thing immediately, which is, first of all, I think the leadership has to really believe that, first of all, there is unrealized potential in most people. I think nearly everybody has untapped potential. I absolutely agree that nearly everybody can do more than they're currently doing, and part of that is that the environments we create don't allow them to. But part of it is that some people just don't want to. So I think the first question you have to ask yourself is, do we believe in that kind of concept? Then when you look at the individuals that work for you, ask yourself, even though they've got untapped potential, which they certainly will, have they got the will? Because you need to weed them out quite quickly, because the people we want to spend time with are the people that have the untapped potential, but also have a will to want to release it and be better and do more. I think then from there, it's, I think then going back to kind of your approach that, and I know Vanessa's an HR director, so she might want to row me after this on this one, but I think you need to move away from the word talent as well. You see great organizations that have really embraced this. They ban the word talent. So if I take a really big company like Sodexo as an example, so, you know, I think one of the biggest companies in the world now, they're not allowed to use the word talent in their organization. They only use the word potential. And the reason for that is that unrealized potential isn't a talent that people were born or gifted with. Pretty much anybody can develop skills and capabilities. So kind of language like talent that assumes some people are talented and some people are not is really, really dangerous in a world of releasing potential. What we need to buy into is stuff like the book Grit. For those that have read the book Grit, all the top mathematicians in the world, none of them were gifted mathematicians at school. So we all have the ability to be great at pretty much anything we are interested in being great at. So I think there's that move as well from the word talent into potential. And probably just the last thing, just to be practical, Vanessa, because you said about, development plans. Yeah, I think it's, I mean, all that stuff for me is still really, really important. I think people having development plans about what they want to develop in and release that potential, for me, absolutely there needs to be coaching around that from leaders, and involvement in projects. Absolutely. The only way you make people truly release potential in people and make them more capable is getting to work on real things. We can teach them stuff, but until they go and apply that and use it and fail and reset and go again, they're never really going to really step up. So yeah, involvement in real life projects, really, really critical for me. Hopefully I answered that sufficiently enough. Okay, so we're kind of out of time officially, although I'm very happy to stay on. And if anybody else wants to stick up another question or wants to put their hand up, I'll just give it another minute or so if that's the case. Otherwise, we'll start to wrap up. Okay, I think we've exhausted it there. So yeah, I think. Okay, so thank you again for joining us. Hopefully that was useful. As I said, reach out if there's any questions on any of those things that you want to explore in more detail. And make sure you're with us next week for Naim Alvi from Notepad for his conversation on leveraging brand. So look forward to seeing you then. Take care. Thank you.